Bottom page 67. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Miss Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains and circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think that fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. And here's the instructions. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them, and here it was for me. Wasn't it because that self-reliance had failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse.
Okay, in that paragraph that Joe just read, we see basically the same set of instructions to look at fears as we had for resentments, except worded a little bit differently, which is Bill's way of doing things. He's not about to repeat himself exactly the same way twice in a row. So we made up another little inventory sheet called a review of fears, and it looks almost like the resentment sheet. It's got the 5 columns in it. Column 1, who or what do I fear? Column 2, the cause. Column 3, affects my. Column 4, what did I do? And column 5, where had I been? So we go back to column 1, and just like with resentments, we make a list of our fears, going always from top to bottom. Now, we men tend to say, well, we don't have much fear, we're tough, we're macho. But we're not talking about physical fear as much as we are all these fears that run through our mind that really control us and rule us and dominate us, that determines what we do and what we don't do, and etc. And I know, just like resentments, I didn't think I had much fear. In fact, I told my sponsor I don't really have any fear. He said, oh, surely, you're afraid of something. And I said, well, not that I know of. He said, are you afraid of snakes? I said, well, hell yes, everybody's afraid of snakes. He said, write that down. And I wrote snakes down, and that started the thing going. And I began to fill out, once again, sheet after sheet after sheet after sheet of fears. We all got fears. Fears connected with our marriages. Fears connected with our children. Fears connected with our jobs. Fears connected with the aging process. Fears connected with this and that, and so on and so forth. All we have to do is just make a list of them, just like we did with the resentments. When I made up that list of fears, I never realized I had that much fear. You can only see one at a time in your head. And I don't think any of us will really realize how much fear controls and dominates our thinking till we get them all down on paper and see them in their entirety for the first time. Column 2. What's the cause of the fear? Now, like Joe said, we're not going to attempt to psychoanalyze ourselves. We're not going to say that I'm afraid of the dark because Mother set me sideways on the potty when I was 2 years old. Fear is like resentments. Fear can be used for a worthwhile purpose. It can bring caution and keep us out of trouble. Yeah, I'm a little bit afraid of the dark. Why? I don't have headlights and I can't see at night. And that keeps me from getting hurt. I'm a little bit afraid of heights. Why? I don't have wings and I can't fly. And that keeps me from getting hurt. But if those kind of fears keep me from going outside after dark, keep me from riding in an elevator or an airplane, then I better get them on this paper and look at them, because they're controlling my life for me. Most of our fears, just like the book says, did we ourselves not set the ball rolling? And most of our fears are going to be centered around just 2 or 3 things. I'm scared to death I'm going to lose something I've already got. Scared to death I'm not going to get something I want. Or I've done something I shouldn't have done, and I'm scared to death what they're going to do whenever they find out about it. And nearly all my fears stem from those kind of things. Let's give you a couple of fast examples. Column 1, let's put down my boss for the first fear. Column 2, let's put down the police for the second fear. Now, we can list many of them, but those are just a couple common ones. Column 2, what's the cause of that fear with my boss? Well, I'm afraid he's going to fire me. Well, very simple. What's the cause of my fear with the police? Well, I'm afraid they're going to put me in jail. Very simple reasons for that. Column 3. What part of self is affected? If my boss fires me, is that going to be a threat to my security? Going to be a threat to my self-esteem? Sure. If the police put me in jail, is that going to be a threat to my security? Going to be a threat to my self-esteem? Going to be a threat to my sex life? Once again, the kind I'd like to have, yeah. There's some in there I don't want, but... Column 4. What did I do to set this thing in motion? As far as my boss is concerned, I'm always late for work. He's threatened me a half a dozen different times, but I'm always coming in late for work, and he's getting pretty tired of that. How about this deal with the police? Well, I'm always breaking the law. I'm exceeding the speed limit every time I get out there. I'm always stealing from people. I'm scared to death they're going to catch me now and put me in jail. Column 5. Where had I been? This deal with my boss. Am I selfish? Sure, I'm selfish. Am I inconsiderate? You betcha I'm inconsiderate. You know, if I really needed one to do the things I'm supposed to do, I'd be at work on time. Wouldn't be creating this kind of problem for my boss. He wouldn't have to be threatened to fire me. Complete inconsideration of other people. This deal with the police. Am I selfish? Oh, yeah. Hell, I'm driving 85 miles an hour, taking a chance on killing a half a dozen different people. Why don't I just drive by the speed limit, see? Am I inconsiderate? You betcha. Am I dishonest? Sure I am. Same old character defects behind these fears. That's behind the resentments. And again, what we're trying to do is work our way into that fifth column. You see, if I wasn't so selfish, I wouldn't have to be afraid of losing what I've got or not getting what I want. If I wasn't so dishonest, I wouldn't be doing those things that create problems for others, and I'm scared to death what they're going to do when they catch me. If I wasn't such a self-seeking, frightened individual in the first place, I wouldn't have to experience so much fear. If I wasn't so inconsiderate of other human beings, I wouldn't be doing the things that create problems for them. With the same old character defects out there in that fifth column, that's behind the fears as we had behind resentments. But if I could become a little less selfish, a little less dishonest, a little less self-seeking, frightened, a little less inconsiderate of others, then maybe I wouldn't have to experience so much fear. At the very least, I'm going to have to do something about those things in the fifth column. Because if I stay that way, then fear is going to continue to eat me up. And fear blocks me off from God just like a resentment does. And the fears control and rule and dominate my thinking for me. Now, once again, we're doing step 4. This is the fears part of it. Fifth column, we see the exact nature of the wrong we're going to talk to another human being about. The fear is what blocks me from God. That's the wrong. But what would it be that creates that fear in the first place? In the fifth column, I see the character defects I'm going to be willing to turn loose of in 6. In the fifth column, I see the shortcomings I'm going to ask God to take away in 7. Quite naturally, some of the names in column 1 are going to be people and institutions I've harmed. And I'm scared to death what they're going to do when they catch me. So their names are going to come off of column 1 and be added to the sheet to be used later on for steps 8 and 9. So we've given ourselves everything we need down for resentments and for fears as far as steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are concerned. Now you think resentments look stupid. Wait till you get your fears down on paper. Oh, they look good in your head. But they look double dumb when you get them down on paper and really see the truth behind them. And they look so double dumb that a lot of those fears are going to begin to disappear automatically, simply because we see how dumb they really are. They'll no longer have any meaning for us. But then, just like with resentments, there'll be 1, 2, 3, or 4 that have been embedded in our minds so long that they don't disappear automatically. And we're going to have God's help on that also. We now come to the second prayer in the big book on step 4. We had one for resentments, now we've got one for fear.
Page 68. He said, perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for we're now on a different basis. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust our infinite God rather than our finite selves. See, but now I've done step 3, so I have a God in my life. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. Now, we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think that spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it's the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. And here's the prayer. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. And at once, we commence to outgrow fear.
We hear always about the promises on page 83 and 84. We never hear about the promises spread throughout the entire book. Joe just read one of the greatest promises to be found anywhere in the big book. We ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be instead. And at once, we commence to outgrow that fear. Just like with the resentments, we can take these deeply embedded fears one at a time. Ask God to remove them on a daily basis. Ask Him to direct our attention to what He would have us be instead. And at once, we commence to outgrow that fear. Now just think, if 95% of these fears disappear automatically because they look so stupid and dumb, if the other 5% that can be removed through prayer, then that means that this little file cabinet I had up here in my head that was full of fears has now been emptied out. The damaged and unsaleable goods called fear have now been removed. And once again, God is not going to allow another hole in my head. Got enough of those already. If the fears are removed, they have to be replaced. And the only thing that can replace them will be the opposite of them. And where my mind used to be filled with fear, now my mind is filled with faith and courage. And I find that I can do many, many things that I was always afraid to do. And just as importantly, I can quit doing many things that I was afraid to quit. Automatically, that comes to the surface. It's always been a part of my makeup, faith and courage has. But in my chase for money, power, prestige, sex, those things had to be repressed to let me operate on the level I wanted to operate on. And now that they're gone, or now that fear is gone, they automatically come to the surface. Another very positive happening. 2/3 of my little store now has been straightened up. Isn't that something? Now, just like with a resentment, if you've got a fear that you don't want to get rid of, for God's sake, get it on this sheet. Knowing full well it might get you drunk. If you don't want to get rid of it, let's get it on this sheet and see the truth behind it. That's what a moral inventory is, seeing the truth behind these things. Let me give you an example of how fear can control us and rule us. Be honest with me now. How many of you in this room this morning would like to go back to school and finish your education? Could I see your hands? Oh man, they're popping up all over the room. Okay, I'll ask you another question. Please be honest. How many of you really intend to do that? Can I see your hands? Less than 20% of them went up this time. Why? Nothing in the world but fear. Fear that we can't measure up, fear of failure, fear of hard work, keeps us from actually doing things that we really would like to do. All my life I've loved to work with my hands. I always wanted to build a set of kitchen cabinets. But I never would do it because I knew there would be a lot of mistakes in them. They wouldn't look good. People would laugh and I would be embarrassed. After I worked this program several years, I built a set of kitchen cabinets with my hands. Now, they don't look very good and there's a lot of mistakes in them and people laugh, but I don't give a damn anymore.
I had this young guy named Todd that I sponsored years ago, and he was unemployed and unemployable, 29 years old, and he had had 13 jobs that last year of his sobriety, or last year of his drinking. Well, he'd been sober a couple of years, now he's 29 years old, and I said, Todd, what are you going to do with your life? He said, well, I don't know. I said, well, how about what have you always wanted to do? He said, I've always wanted to be an engineer. I said, well, why don't you go back to school and be an engineer? He said, I don't even have a high school education. I said, well, you can get a high school education if you want one. He said, Joe, do you have any idea how old I'll be by the time I become an engineer? I said, do you have any idea how old you're going to be anyhow? Todd went to Tulsa College, junior college, and got a high school diploma and got on the dean's honor list. Became a very good student. He wasn't dumb. And eventually got a scholarship to the University of Oklahoma Engineering School, completed that course. He's now working, or he was working out, and is working out in Modesto, California for an engineering firm. And he told me last fall that he had one more semester and he'd be graduating. Now, that's 15 years ago. And now he's a full-fledged engineer. But he did it because he had the faith and courage to do so. My sponsor, Franklin, at this time, George had gotten some trouble, and I had another sponsor named Franklin. And Franklin told me about the two most important things about prayer. He said, absolutely, the two most important things about prayer. One was to start, and the other was to continue. As I look back at that advice, every time I prayed, I've changed just a little fuzz. Hardly enough that anybody would notice, including me. The next time I prayed, I changed another little bit, hardly noticeable. And as the years go by, there's a major, major change in me. I'm not what I used to be, thank God. I'm just not that, thank God, because of prayer. Can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. Only God can heal a sick mind, see? And every time I pray, I change just a little bit. Slowly over a period of time, there's a major change within me.